I was his deputy, and we had a team, I forget how many, maybe 8, 10 men from different agencies. So when they hit the ground in Saigon, they were each, fanned out to write their reports. Some were political, some were economic, some military, and so on.
In public, Kennedy has declared the war to be the business of the Vietnamese. In private, Kennedy tells his team the defense of South Vietnam is vital to the U.S.
We didn't go out until the president had decided that he was not going to see that area lost. From our point of view, it was an implementation mission, not a policy mission.
But the mission returns to offer new policy. They tell Kennedy he should send American combat troops to Vietnam. It is the first time this is suggested. Pierre Salinger, the president's press secretary.
But we did not send combat troops. And we never sent combat troops during the time that President Kennedy was in office. Why? Because President Kennedy believed that the United States had a responsibility to help South Vietnam, but not a responsibility to take up the warfare on behalf of South Vietnam.
Some young Americans ventured far from home that summer, armed only with knowledge and a sense of responsibility. They were called the Peace Corps. 23-year-old Dennis Galvin was one of the first to volunteer.
And I think that we can help. I think the Peace Corps can help in these countries.
My family was shocked. South Boston is a place where people are hardworking and God-fearing, and they don't worry about what happens in East Africa very much.
Throughout the summer, the volunteers trained for their new jobs. On August 28th, President Kennedy addressed the first group of 74 volunteers.
If you do well, then the Peace Corps will be developed, and more Americans will go abroad. And we'll find a greater and greater response to this idea of serving our country. Thank you.
I remember saying to Kennedy, I now know more about Tanganyika than I know about South Boston. And he laughed. I moved on. But that was a very important moment for me.
As that first group prepared to leave for Ghana and Tanganyika, Sergeant Shriver, the director of the Peace Corps, was worried.
For that whole project to be a failure would give Kennedy's political opponents an opportunity to say, ha, see what we told you? He's too young to have been elected president. He's too inexperienced to have been elected president. So I was worried, yes, I was worried. I wanted it to be a success, and it had to be an instantaneous success.
And that took more than knowledge and goodwill. It needed strong bodies. The volunteers were sent to survival school. Reverend William Sloan Coffin ran it like a boot camp.
Nobody likes to do it. I hate it myself, but if you accept it and you do it, why, there's value in it.
We had a rope course, and we had all kinds of exercises. But all designed to make people feel they couldn't do that. And then they did do it. And I would kind of make the point, you did it physically, you're expected to do it intellectually, morally, spiritually. That's why you're in the Peace Corps.
Africa is beautiful, but many of its people spend their lives up against the walls of poverty and ignorance. The Peace Corps attacked those walls. Dennis Galvin did it by building roads in northern Tanganyika.
Putting 21 surveyors into that country probably tripled or at least doubled the number of surveyors, even in that very simple way of increasing the technical capacities of the country. That was an important contribution.
The Peace Corps was an instant success. Sergeant Shriver needn't have worried, and the volunteers had learned as much as they taught.
I mapped roads all over the province. We did a couple of jobs in town, built a couple of bridges. I built a water supply over there, and I've worked on a lot of jobs in a lot of places since then, but I'm as proud of that water supply as any job I've ever done anywhere.
There was this tiny hypocrisy. We sent people out to teach the American way, but we sent some of them to countries whose representatives to the United Nations weren't allowed to eat in American restaurants. not white American restaurants. This, too, was the American way. Come back. Bring your ticket for the Freedom Ride, a bus tour to and through the wall separating white from black.
Our world will continue in a moment with Up Against the Wall, August, October, 1961.
Welcome back to the late summer of 1961. In most of the South that season, this is what a black person found in a bus station. Despite the law of the land, old customs and in some cases state law prevailed. Enter the Freedom Riders, 7 blacks and 6 whites who that spring challenged segregated facilities in several southern states. Mostly they were insulted or ignored. But in Alabama, they ran into trouble and were beaten by mobs. And by the time they got to Mississippi, the original Freedom Riders had retired from the field. But hundreds of people, mostly young people, were taking their place, and in September would win their point. Now, to illustrate that victory, we're going to back up our time frame a little, the late spring of 1961. A year, incidentally, when some blacks seem to be doing just fine.
Jim Crow does at least seem mortally wounded. In many cities, integration has been peaceful as local police and local people uphold the law of the land. And the Marvelettes have the #1 song on the mostly white pop charts. Please, Mr. Postman is the biggest hit so far for a new company called Motown. Black comedians like Dick Gregory make black jokes for white audiences.
I mean, now, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't mind paying my income tax if I knew it was going to a friendly country. This is an angry black man.
It may be a friendly country, but to blacks, it's a damn slow one.
The white man, time is running out on him. Just like the tide. He's got to go.
That September, ABC broadcasts a documentary. It tells the black point of view. It's about impatience. It is not popular in some parts of the South. They boycott the sponsor, Bell and Howell. Louisiana prohibits its schools from buying their products. Last spring, a group of activists from CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, began to force a confrontation between the federal and state law. They called it a freedom ride. They call themselves Freedom Riders. James Farmer was the head of CORE.
We began the Freedom Rides as an attempt to break down one part of that segregated pattern. That part was segregation in interstate travel. We felt we were not practicing civil disobedience because the federal law was on our side.
The federal courts had ruled segregation was illegal in interstate travel, but they had not really challenged the state laws about it. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had asked the Interstate Commerce Commission for a ruling. Mississippi buses were segregated, and Mississippi's white people, most of them, were happy with the system just the way it was. Robert Nichols was the city prosecutor for Jackson, Mississippi, the man who enforced Jim Crow laws.
There was an old saying that a black man should stay in his place. And this means that he doesn't particularly interfere with the white man. And I think that was a feeling, undoubtedly, about it.
Mississippi Governor Ross Burnett had assured everybody that the Freedom Riders were a bunch of violent, crazy outsiders and had promised they would not be allowed to ruin things in Mississippi. Bernard Lafayette, a Freedom Rider.
It was a police state in the sense that people did not get out of line. Anything happened in Mississippi, it was ordered. So what we did was disturb this kind of peace and order, which was a negative order, because it was injustice, it was oppression.